John Carter had been traveling for many days across the dry, open land of Arizona. The sun beat down on his back, and the dusty wind filled his nose as he guided his horse along the narrow trails between hills and deserts. John was a rancher by trade. He spent most of his life with cattle, horses, and the daily hard work of running a ranch. He was used to long hours, early mornings, and the quiet solitude of the plains. But this journey was different. This journey was not just about his work. It was about meeting people he had never known and learning to live in a place entirely unlike his home. John had heard stories of the Apache tribe, a proud and ancient people who lived in the rugged mountains and deserts of the Southwest. The stories spoke of their strength, their courage, and their close connection to the land. John had come here with a plan to trade livestock. He hoped to bring some of his best cattle to trade for supplies, and perhaps learn more about the land from those who knew it best. He imagined it would be a simple visit, an exchange of goods, a few polite conversations, and then a safe journey back to his ranch. But as he rode closer to the heart of the Apache lands, he realized that things would not be simple. The tribe had rules and customs that were very different from anything he had ever known. When he first saw the camp, it was unlike any place he had ever visited. Small wooden shelters and tents were arranged neatly in circles, and smoke rose from cooking fires, carrying the smell of roasted meat and herbs. Children ran and played freely, their laughter echoing across the land. Women moved with purpose, carrying water, preparing food, and tending to the young and the elderly. The men were strong and quiet, watching John with curious, careful eyes as he entered the camp. The chief of the tribe, a tall man with a calm and commanding presence, stepped forward. He did not greet John in the way people usually greeted travelers in town. There were no handshakes or quick words. Instead, he studied John for a long moment, as if reading his thoughts. Finally, he spoke. His voice low but steady. "You may not leave this place until you have earned the respect of all the women in our tribe," he said. John stopped in his tracks. He blinked in surprise, not sure he had understood correctly. "All the women?" he asked, his voice uncertain. The chief nodded. "Our women are the heart of this tribe. They decide who may come and who must leave. If you want to trade with us, if you want to leave with honor, you must first show them that you are worthy." At first, John felt a rush of panic. How could he possibly do such a thing? He was not used to following rules like this. In his world, a handshake or a signed agreement was enough. But here, the rules were different. He realized quickly that he had no choice. If he wanted to survive and complete his mission, he had to follow the tribe's customs. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He nodded slowly. "I understand," he said, though inside he was full of doubt. The first few days were the hardest. John tried to follow the tribe's customs, but he struggled to understand the routines and ways of the women. He watched them as they went about their day, carrying heavy water buckets, tending to children, weaving baskets, and preparing food over open fires. Every task seemed to require skill, patience, and strength. John realized that, to gain their respect, he could not just offer words, he had to act. He began with small tasks. He helped a young woman carry firewood to her home. She looked at him with surprise at first, then with a faint smile, as if she approved of his effort. Next, he tried to help with cooking, carefully chopping vegetables and stirring pots under her watchful eyes. He quickly learned that mistakes were noticed and sometimes met with gentle correction, but no anger. Each day, John grew a little more confident in helping, and he started to notice that the women were observing him closely. Not just for what he did, but for how he did it. They wanted to see patience, humility, and respect. John also spent time listening. He listened to the stories of the women, tales of the land, of survival, and of their families. He learned about the challenges they faced and the skills they used to overcome them. Each story taught him something important, not just about the tribe, but about life itself. He realized that earning respect was not about grand gestures or words, but about understanding, helping, and showing care. One evening, John was asked to accompany an older woman to the nearby river to fetch water. The path was rocky and steep, and the sun had begun to set. As they walked, she spoke to him in her language, which he did not fully understand. He smiled and nodded, trying to show that he was listening. She pointed to the river, then to the sky, and finally to him. Slowly, John realized she was teaching him something important. The river gave life, but it required care and attention. He helped her carry the heavy water containers back to the camp, and by the time they arrived, he felt a quiet pride. The woman looked at him with approval, a small nod that felt like a victory, but it was not always easy. Some women were wary of him. They watched from a distance, skeptical of his intentions. John could feel their doubt like a shadow, and it made him question himself. Was he truly being helpful? Was he acting for the right reasons? He had to remind himself constantly to be patient, to keep learning, and to stay humble. Every small success mattered, but so did every mistake. Each day was a lesson in understanding and respect. John also learned about the land itself. He saw how the women moved with purpose, using the terrain to their advantage, gathering plants for food and medicine, and understanding the signs of weather and seasons. He began to see that survival in this environment required knowledge, observation, and cooperation. Helping the women was not just about earning respect, it was about learning to live in harmony with the land and the people who knew it best. As the days passed, John noticed subtle changes in the way the women treated him. A nod here, a smile there. They began to include him in small conversations, asking his opinion on tasks, or allowing him to carry out chores independently. He felt a sense of belonging he had never experienced outside his ranch. Though he was still an outsider, he was beginning to understand what it meant to be part of a community, even temporarily. By the end of the first month, John had learned many lessons. He realized that patience, respect, and consistent effort were more important than speed or strength. He saw that helping someone genuinely, without expecting immediate reward, earned trust over time. He understood that every person, especially the women of the tribe, had a voice and a role, and that ignoring these roles could lead to failure. John's journey had started with the goal of trading livestock, but he had quickly discovered that his true task was far more complex. He was learning about humanity, about resilience, and about the quiet strength that comes from understanding others. Each day brought new challenges, new lessons, and new moments of connection. He was no longer just a rancher in a strange land. He was a student, learning from the women who led the tribe with wisdom, skill, and care. As he lay by the fire each night, exhausted from a day of work and learning, John thought about how far he had come. He knew that earning the respect of all the women in the tribe would take time, effort, and patience. But he also felt a spark of hope. He had survived the first month, learned many of the tribe's ways, and had begun to form connections. He knew that if he continued to work honestly and with humility, he could succeed. And more than that, he realized that this journey was changing him in ways he had never imagined. In the quiet of the desert night, under a sky full of stars, John felt a deep sense of purpose. He was here for more than trade. He was here to understand, to respect, and to grow. And he was ready for the challenges that lay ahead, knowing that each day was an opportunity to learn, to help, and to earn the trust of those who had the power to decide his fate. After the first month in the Apache camp, John Carter began to understand that earning the respect of the women was far more than performing tasks or helping with chores. It was about forming real connections and showing genuine care. Each woman in the tribe had her own personality, her own expectations, and her own way of seeing the world. To truly succeed, John would have to learn to understand each of them individually, while also respecting the group as a whole. The days grew warmer as the sun climbed higher in the sky, and John's work became more challenging. He helped carry water from the river, gathered firewood, and assisted in preparing food for the community. But he noticed that the women were testing him in subtler ways too. Sometimes they would ask him to observe quietly, to notice the small details of daily life. Other times, they would challenge him with questions about why he did things in a certain way. John quickly realized that this was not just about completing a task, it was about demonstrating thoughtfulness, patience, and understanding. One morning, an elder woman asked John to help her tend a small garden. The garden was modest, but it required careful attention. She taught him how to water the plants evenly, how to remove weeds without harming the young shoots, and how to recognize when a plant was ready to harvest. John listened carefully, mimicking her movements and asking questions when he was unsure. The woman watched him silently at first, then offered a small nod of approval when she saw that he was learning. This moment felt significant to John. It was the first time he truly felt that he was gaining the trust of someone in the tribe. Over the following weeks, John focused on learning about the daily routines of the women. He observed how they divided tasks, how they taught their children, and how they supported one another in both small and large matters. He noticed the strength it took to carry heavy loads, to manage multiple responsibilities at once, and to solve problems without complaint. John admired their determination and resilience, realizing that his own life on the ranch, while hard in its own way, did not compare to the level of skill and endurance the women displayed every day. One afternoon, a young mother approached John with a request. She needed help building a proper shelter for her children. The existing shelter was weak and could not withstand storms. John felt nervous at first, as he had never built anything quite like this before. But the woman patiently guided him, showing him how to select the strongest branches, how to tie them together securely, and how to arrange the covering so it would stay dry in the rain. They worked side by side for hours, speaking little, but communicating through gestures, patience, and shared effort. When the shelter was finally complete, the woman smiled warmly at John. She patted his shoulder lightly and said something in her language. John didn't understand every word, but the tone was kind, approving, and grateful. John also began to notice that some women were more cautious. They would watch him from a distance, unsure if his intentions were sincere. He realized that he could not rush their trust. He had to be consistent in his actions, showing respect in small ways every day. He started paying attention to their routines, helping without being asked, and offering assistance quietly when he saw it was needed. Slowly, he saw subtle changes in their behavior. Smiles became more frequent, nods more genuine, and small conversations began to happen naturally. One evening, the chief called John to a gathering. The women had requested that he participate in a discussion about the needs of the tribe. John listened carefully as they spoke, trying to understand not only their words but also their concerns, hopes, and the ways they cared for the community. He realized that earning respect was not about performing tasks alone. It was about showing that he could understand, empathize, and contribute to the well-being of the tribe. He offered his thoughts when appropriate, always respectful, always careful to listen first. John also faced challenges that tested his patience and humility. Once, he made a mistake while helping with a cooking task. He mismeasured an ingredient, and the food did not turn out as expected. The woman he was helping corrected him gently but firmly. At first, John felt embarrassed and frustrated with himself, but he quickly learned that mistakes were opportunities to grow. By acknowledging his errors and showing a willingness to learn, he earned more respect than he would have by pretending to know everything. As the weeks passed, John began forming bonds with the children in the tribe as well. He would play simple games with them, teach them how to ride horses safely, and share stories from his own childhood. The women watched these interactions closely, seeing his genuine care and patience. The children's laughter and trust became another sign that John was becoming an accepted member of the camp, at least temporarily. One day, John was asked to assist with a healing ritual. A young girl had fallen ill, and the women were preparing herbal remedies. John observed quietly, learning the importance of each step, the way the herbs were selected and prepared, and the care taken in every action. He was allowed to help under supervision, carefully following instructions. The experience taught him not only about healing but also about the deep wisdom the women carried and shared. He understood that their knowledge was a form of power, and that respecting it was essential to gaining their trust. John's respect for the women grew deeper with each passing day. He began to see how they supported one another, how they made decisions for the good of the community, and how they balanced strength with care. He realized that this was the true heart of the tribe, and that his goal was not simply to complete tasks, but to understand, honor, and participate in their way of life. There were moments of doubt, too. John sometimes wondered if he could ever truly earn the respect of all the women. Some were quieter, more reserved, and it was harder to reach them. He had to remind himself to be patient, to observe carefully, and to offer help without expectation. Each small gesture, each moment of sincere effort, was a step toward his goal. As part 2 of his journey continued, John began to feel a sense of belonging. He was still an outsider, and he knew that. But he was no longer simply a visitor. He was part of the rhythm of the camp, participating in daily life, learning from the women, and gradually becoming someone they could rely on. Each day brought new challenges, new lessons, and new opportunities to prove his sincerity and care. By the end of this period, John understood that his time in the tribe was changing him in ways he had never anticipated. He had entered the camp focused on trade and survival, but he was leaving each day with knowledge, respect, and a deeper understanding of human connection. He knew that the path ahead would be difficult, but he was determined to continue, to grow, and to earn the trust of every woman in the tribe. The sun set over the desert hills, casting a warm glow over the camp. John sat by the fire, tired but content. He thought about the day's lessons, the tasks he had completed, and the small moments of connection he had experienced. He realized that respect was not given lightly, but it could be earned through patience, humility, and sincere effort, and he was ready to continue this journey, one day at a time, knowing that every step brought him closer to understanding the heart of the Apache tribe. As weeks turned into months, John Carter began to feel more comfortable in the Apache camp, but he also realized that gaining the trust of all the women would be far more challenging than he had ever imagined. Each woman had her own expectations and her own way of judging him. Some were warm and welcoming, while others were cautious, observing his actions carefully before deciding whether he was truly sincere. John understood that his journey was no longer just about completing tasks. It was about showing respect, understanding, and patience in every moment of daily life. One morning, a group of women asked John to help repair a fence that had been damaged by a recent storm. At first, the task seemed straightforward, but as he worked, he realized that the fence was not only functional, it was also symbolic. It separated the grazing areas for livestock, helped protect the gardens, and demonstrated the women's careful planning and organization. John worked alongside the women, learning not only how to repair the fence, but also why it was so important to the community. Each nail he hammered and each post he set became a lesson in respect and responsibility. During this time, John also began to notice the subtle ways the women communicated. A glance, a nod, or a gentle shake of the head could convey approval, caution, or disapproval. He had to pay careful attention to these signals to understand what was expected of him. It was not always easy. Sometimes he misread their gestures or failed to act quickly enough, and the women would quietly correct him. At first, these moments frustrated him, but he soon realized that they were part of the learning process. Each correction was not criticism but guidance, helping him understand the tribe's ways more deeply. One afternoon, John was asked to help a woman with a special task preparing medicinal herbs for the tribe. This was an important responsibility, as the herbs were used to treat illnesses and injuries. John watched carefully as she selected the plants, explaining their uses and how to handle them properly. When it was his turn, he carefully followed her instructions, crushing leaves, mixing powders, and preparing the remedies with steady hands. The woman observed his every move, nodding occasionally, and finally smiled when she saw that he had done everything correctly. John felt a quiet sense of pride, knowing that he had earned her trust through careful attention and respect. Not all of John's experiences were smooth. Some women were more skeptical and kept their distance, testing him in subtle ways. He noticed that they would sometimes give him tasks that seemed small or even trivial, but he understood that these were tests of character. How he approached these tasks, whether he completed them carefully and respectfully, was as important as the results. John learned to approach every request, no matter how simple, with patience and sincerity. Over time, even the most cautious women began to acknowledge his efforts with small signs of approval. As John's skills and confidence grew, he began to take on more complex responsibilities. He helped organize food storage, assisted with childcare, and even participated in planning community activities. Each task brought new lessons. He learned the importance of teamwork, the value of listening, and the strength of quiet leadership. He began to see how the women supported one another, sharing knowledge, offering help, and ensuring that the community functioned smoothly. John realized that their strength was not just physical but also emotional and intellectual, and that earning their respect required him to match that dedication with his own consistent effort. One day, John faced a challenge that tested his patience and humility. A young girl had injured her foot while playing near the river. The women quickly attended to her, preparing herbal poultices and carefully bandaging the injury. John was asked to assist, but he quickly realized that this task required not only careful hands, but also sensitivity and calmness. He had to move slowly, follow instructions exactly, and remain composed despite his own nervousness. The women watched him closely, observing his ability to handle a delicate situation with care. By the time the girl was safely treated, John had learned an important lesson. Earning trust often meant showing empathy and self-control, in addition to skill. As he continued his work, John also began to understand the importance of storytelling and shared history in the tribe. Each evening, he would sit by the fire and listen as the women recounted tales of their ancestors, their struggles, and their triumphs. Through these stories, John learned about the values and principles that guided the community. He realized that respect was not just about actions in the present, it was also about honoring the past and understanding the traditions that shaped the tribe. He began to participate more actively, asking thoughtful questions, showing interest, and demonstrating that he valued their knowledge. Over time, John formed personal connections with several women. He helped a mother teach her children how to prepare food safely, guided another in repairing a damaged roof, and assisted an elder with organizing tools and supplies. Each interaction strengthened his bonds with the women, and he began to feel a sense of belonging that he had never experienced before. He realized that trust was not given lightly, but it could be earned through patience, respect, and consistent effort. Despite these successes, John faced moments of doubt. There were times when he wondered if he would ever gain the approval of every woman in the tribe. Some remained reserved, observing silently and offering no clear signs of acceptance. In these moments, John reminded himself to stay patient, to focus on learning, and to continue offering help without expectation. He understood that true respect could not be forced. It had to be earned through genuine care and effort over time. As the weeks passed, John noticed subtle changes in the camp. The women who had once been distant now included him in small conversations. They asked his opinion on certain tasks, shared stories, and even offered gentle advice. Children began to approach him more freely, showing that his presence was now trusted and welcomed. John felt a quiet sense of pride, knowing that his efforts were beginning to pay off. One particularly challenging day, John was asked to assist in preparing for a community celebration. This event required careful coordination, attention to detail, and teamwork. John worked alongside the women, arranging supplies, preparing food, and helping with decorations. It was physically demanding and required him to think creatively, but he approached each task with focus and humility. By the end of the day, the celebration was ready, and the women acknowledged his hard work with smiles and words of approval. John felt a deep sense of accomplishment, knowing that he had contributed to something meaningful for the community. Through these experiences, John began to understand a deeper truth. Earning respect was not just about completing tasks or demonstrating skill. It was about showing empathy, understanding, and dedication. It was about learning from others, listening carefully, and being willing to adapt and grow. The women of the Apache tribe were not merely observers. They were teachers, guiding him through lessons that were both practical and moral. By the end of this period, John had transformed significantly. He had learned to navigate the complexities of daily life in the camp, understood the importance of patience and humility, and formed meaningful connections with several women. Yet he knew that his journey was far from complete. Earning the trust of every woman in the tribe would require continued effort, deeper understanding, and even greater patience. As John lay by the fire each night, reflecting on the day's lessons, he felt a growing sense of purpose. He had entered the camp as a visitor, focused on trade and survival, but he was slowly becoming part of the community in a way that went beyond simple tasks. He was learning to respect traditions, value relationships, and act with sincerity. He knew that the path ahead would be challenging, but he also understood that each day brought new opportunities to prove himself and grow. In the quiet of the desert night, with stars stretching endlessly across the sky, John felt a sense of connection not just to the women he was learning to respect, but to the land, the tribe, and the lessons that had already begun to shape him. He knew that his journey would continue to test him, but he was determined to persevere, understanding that every effort, no matter how small, brought him closer to earning the trust and respect of the Apache women. As the weeks progressed, John Carter began to feel more like a part of the Apache community. Yet he knew that gaining the full trust of the women would not come easily. The women began testing him in ways that went beyond simple chores or daily tasks. They wanted to see his character, his patience, and his ability to understand the needs of the community. These challenges were not easy, and John quickly realized that he had to prove himself not just through work, but through thoughtfulness, empathy, and careful action. One morning, the women gathered together and explained that John would be asked to assist in a series of tasks designed to test his understanding of the tribe's daily life and his ability to work under pressure. The first task involved helping to organize food storage for the upcoming winter. The tribe had limited resources, and every item had to be carefully preserved and placed correctly. John worked alongside several women, carefully sorting grains, dried meat, and herbs. He learned which items could be stored together, which needed to be kept dry, and which were delicate and required extra care. As he worked, he realized that this task was not only practical but also symbolic. It was about showing respect for the efforts of the women and the community as a whole. After the food storage task, John was asked to help with childcare. This was one of the more challenging assignments because it required patience, attentiveness, and the ability to respond quickly to the needs of the children. He assisted in feeding, cleaning, and entertaining them, all while observing the women's methods and learning from their experience. At first, John felt nervous, unsure if he could manage the responsibilities, but the children gradually warmed to him, and the women began to observe his interactions closely. They wanted to see that he could be gentle, patient, and reliable. By the end of the day, John felt a deep sense of accomplishment, knowing he had earned the trust of both the children and the women who cared for them. The next challenge was even more personal. One of the elder women asked John to help mediate a disagreement between two families. The disagreement was minor, but it required careful listening, understanding, and diplomacy. John observed the situation, paying close attention to the words, gestures, and emotions of everyone involved. He offered suggestions respectfully, ensuring that both sides felt heard and understood. The women watched intently, noting how he handled the situation. This test was not about physical labor. It was about demonstrating empathy, patience, and the ability to act thoughtfully in delicate situations. By the end of the day, the families had resolved their disagreement, and the women nodded in approval, recognizing John's growing maturity and understanding. In addition to these tasks, John was asked to participate in a traditional ritual that was important to the tribe. The ritual involved preparing ceremonial items and assisting the women in organizing the space for the ceremony. John observed every detail carefully, learning the meaning behind each action and the significance of the symbols. When it was his turn to assist, he acted with respect and care, making sure not to disturb the process. The women appreciated his attentiveness and dedication, seeing that he approached their traditions with sincerity. This experience taught John that respect was not just about action, it was about understanding and honoring the beliefs and customs of the community. Not all of John's challenges were easy to navigate. Some women remained cautious, observing him silently and testing him in subtle ways. They would ask him to complete small but precise tasks, watching to see if he would follow instructions carefully and act with patience. John had to learn to slow down, pay attention to details, and approach every task with care. He realized that rushing or acting without thought could undermine the trust he had worked so hard to build. Gradually, these women began to acknowledge his efforts with small gestures of approval, a smile, a nod, or a word of encouragement. One particularly difficult task involved helping a woman repair a damaged roof on her home. The roof was fragile, and any mistake could cause serious problems. John worked alongside her, carefully lifting beams, securing coverings, and ensuring the structure was stable. He moved slowly, following her instructions precisely, and focused on every detail. The woman observed him closely, occasionally offering guidance and corrections. By the time the roof was repaired, John had gained her full approval. She smiled warmly and patted his shoulder, a gesture that filled him with pride and satisfaction. Throughout these tests, John also began to notice the importance of observation and learning from mistakes. There were times when he misread a situation or acted too quickly, and the women gently corrected him. Instead of feeling frustrated, John embraced these moments as opportunities to grow. He realized that earning trust was not about perfection. It was about sincerity, effort, and the willingness to learn from experiences. Each correction made him more attentive, patient, and understanding, bringing him closer to the goal of gaining the respect of all the women. In addition to practical tasks, John was also challenged to show kindness and consideration in unexpected ways. He was asked to deliver messages between families, assist with the preparation of herbal remedies, and offer help without being prompted. These small acts of thoughtfulness demonstrated his sincerity and his willingness to contribute to the community in meaningful ways. Over time, the women began to rely on him, recognizing that he was not just a visitor, but someone who cared deeply about their well-being. As Part 4 progressed, John faced a particularly personal challenge that tested his character more deeply than ever. One of the women asked him to assist her in caring for her sick mother. The woman explained that her mother required constant attention, from preparing meals to administering herbal treatments and providing comfort. John felt a mix of nervousness and determination. He knew that this task would require patience, empathy, and consistency. For several days, he stayed by the woman's side, assisting with every need and learning how to offer comfort and support. He moved carefully, observing her mother's reactions and adjusting his actions accordingly. By the end of the period, the woman expressed her gratitude, acknowledging John's dedication and sincerity. This experience taught him that true respect often required personal sacrifice, empathy, and the ability to put others' needs above his own. John also learned the importance of teamwork. Many of the tasks required coordination with multiple women, each contributing her own skills and knowledge. He discovered that listening, observing, and communicating respectfully were just as important as physical effort. He worked to understand each woman's perspective, finding ways to support them without imposing his own ideas. Over time, this approach helped him gain the approval of women who had initially been skeptical of his intentions. By the end of Part 4, John had undergone a transformation. He had faced challenges that tested his patience, empathy, and understanding. He had learned to navigate delicate situations, care for others, and respect the traditions and knowledge of the Apache women. Each task, each interaction, and each test had brought him closer to earning the trust he sought. As the sun set over the desert, casting long shadows across the camp, John sat quietly by the fire. He reflected on the lessons he had learned, the bonds he had formed, and the challenges he had overcome. He realized that this journey was no longer just about earning the right to leave the tribe. It was about understanding the strength, wisdom, and care that the women embodied. He felt a deep respect for their guidance and a growing sense of responsibility to act with sincerity and humility. John knew that the final step of his journey would require him to demonstrate everything he had learned. He would have to show that he had not only completed tasks but had also grown in character, understanding, and respect. Each woman's approval mattered, and he was determined to continue proving himself. Day by day, action by action. In the quiet night, under a sky full of stars, John felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had faced trials, learned lessons, and begun to form meaningful connections. He understood that the path ahead would still be difficult, but he was ready to meet the final challenges with patience, care, and sincerity. Every day had taught him more about life, about trust, and about the power of respect and kindness. And he knew that the women's trust was not just a goal to achieve, it was a journey of growth, learning, and transformation that would stay with him forever. The final days in the Apache camp were some of the most meaningful in John Carter's life. After months of hard work, learning, and careful observation, he finally felt that he was close to earning the trust of all the women in the tribe. He had faced countless challenges, learned their ways, and grown in patience, empathy, and understanding. But he knew that the ultimate test of his character and sincerity was still ahead. Early one morning, the women gathered in a circle near the center of the camp. Their expressions were calm but serious. John approached slowly, feeling both nervous and determined. He understood that this moment would decide whether he had truly earned their approval. The chief, standing nearby, gave a subtle nod, acknowledging John's presence and readiness. The women explained that this final step would involve several tasks designed to test his character in both practical and personal ways. The first task was to assist with preparing a communal meal for the entire tribe. This was no ordinary cooking task. It required careful planning, organization, and collaboration. John worked alongside the women, chopping vegetables, roasting meat, and arranging dishes for serving. He paid close attention to every detail, ensuring that each step was done with care and respect. The women watched silently, observing how he handled the responsibilities. They were looking for more than skill. They wanted to see sincerity, patience, and the ability to work as part of the community. Once the meal was prepared, John was asked to help distribute the food. He moved among the families, carefully handing out portions and making sure everyone received what they needed. He noticed the children's smiles, the elders' nods of approval, and the quiet satisfaction of the women as they observed him. This task reminded John that respect was not about completing chores alone. It was about thoughtfulness, consideration, and the willingness to serve others without seeking reward. Next, John was asked to assist with the care of the tribe's gardens and livestock. This was physically demanding work, but John approached it with patience and diligence. He helped repair fences, water the plants, and guide the animals to safe grazing areas. As he worked, the women observed him, noting his attentiveness and the care he showed for both the land and the animals. John realized that every action, no matter how small, was a reflection of his respect for the community and its traditions. One of the more personal tests involved assisting a woman with a family in need. Their home had been damaged in a recent storm, and they required support to rebuild it. John worked alongside her, carrying heavy materials, arranging shelter, and providing whatever help he could. The woman explained each step patiently, and John followed her guidance carefully. By the end of the day, the home was secure, and the family expressed their gratitude. The women watched quietly, recognizing that John's efforts were not just about completing tasks, but about showing compassion, understanding, and commitment. John also participated in a traditional storytelling evening. The women shared tales of the tribe's history, lessons learned from ancestors, and stories of resilience and courage. John listened intently, asking questions when appropriate, and showing genuine interest in their experiences. This was not a task with a tangible outcome, but it was equally important. By engaging respectfully with their stories, John demonstrated that he valued the wisdom, knowledge, and heritage of the tribe. The women saw that he was not just following instructions, he was learning, reflecting, and appreciating their way of life. Throughout these final challenges, John noticed subtle changes in the women's behavior. The once distant or skeptical women now approached him openly, offering guidance, encouragement, and even gentle smiles. The trust he had worked so hard to earn was becoming evident. He realized that respect could not be rushed or demanded. It had to be shown consistently through thoughtful actions, patience, and sincerity. The most important test came when the women asked John to demonstrate what he had learned from his time in the camp. He was tasked with leading a small group in completing a series of chores, From organizing supplies to caring for animals and assisting families in need, John approached the task with confidence, careful planning, and respect for the women's instructions. He listened to their advice, guided others with patience, and completed each step thoughtfully. By the end of the day, the women nodded in approval, and John felt a deep sense of fulfillment. As evening approached, the women gathered around a central fire. The mood was calm but celebratory. One by one, they spoke, expressing their acknowledgement of John's efforts, sincerity, and growth. They praised his patience, humility, and willingness to learn from them. The words were simple but powerful, carrying the weight of their respect and trust. John listened, feeling a sense of gratitude and humility he had never experienced before. Finally, the chief spoke. He acknowledged John's journey, his dedication, and the bonds he had formed with the women and the community. He explained that the women's blessing now allowed John to leave the tribe with their full approval. John felt a mix of emotions, relief, pride, and deep gratitude. He realized that this journey had changed him profoundly. He was not the same man who had entered the camp months ago. He had learned lessons about patience, respect, empathy, and the strength of community. Before departing, John took the time to say goodbye to each woman individually. He expressed his gratitude for their guidance, their trust, and the lessons they had taught him. The women responded with warmth, smiles, and words of encouragement. Acknowledging his growth and sincerity, John felt a deep sense of connection, knowing that he had earned not only their respect but also their friendship. As John prepared to leave the camp, he reflected on the journey he had undertaken. He thought about the long days of work, the challenges he had faced, and the lessons he had learned. He realized that the true reward was not the ability to leave the tribe, but the knowledge, understanding, and personal growth he had gained along the way. He had learned to respect traditions, value relationships, and act with sincerity and humility. Mounting his horse, John looked back at the camp one last time. He saw the women tending to their daily tasks, the children playing, and the elders observing with quiet satisfaction. He felt a profound sense of gratitude and respect for the community that had welcomed him, challenged him, and guided him through this transformative journey. The sun was setting over the desert, casting a warm glow across the land. John felt a sense of peace, knowing that he had completed not just a physical journey, but a journey of the heart and mind. As he rode away from the camp, John carried with him more than memories. He carried lessons that would stay with him for a lifetime. The importance of patience, the value of empathy, the strength of respect, and the power of genuine care. He understood that true connection was built through consistent effort, humility, and a willingness to learn from others. The journey back to his ranch was quiet, giving John time to reflect on the experiences that had shaped him. He thought about the women who had tested him, taught him, and guided him. He remembered the children whose laughter had brought joy, the elders whose wisdom had inspired, and the families whose trust he had earned. Each memory was a reminder of the lessons he had learned and the growth he had achieved. By the time John reached his own land, he was no longer just a rancher returning from a trading trip. He was a man transformed by the experience, carrying with him the respect of the Apache women and the wisdom of their community. He knew that his life would never be the same. The lessons he had learned would guide him in his work, his relationships, and his understanding of the world. Even years later, John would think back to the time he spent in the Apache camp. He would remember the long days of work, the challenges he faced, and the moments of connection that had shaped him. He would remember the strength, wisdom, and care of the women, and the profound impact their trust and guidance had on his life. That journey, which had begun with a simple goal of trade, had become a journey of personal growth, understanding, and lasting respect. In the end, John realized that the true measure of success was not in completing tasks or gaining permission to leave, but in the growth, humility, and understanding he had gained. The blessing of the Apache women was not just a formality. It was a recognition of his transformation, his sincerity, and his ability to honor the traditions and values of their community. As he returned to his ranch, John carried their lessons with him, forever changed by the journey, and forever grateful for the trust and guidance of the women who had taught him so much.